I used to bring Harold his groceries on Thursdays. That was how it started. 2 years ago, I moved into 14B Greendale Lane, this tiny apartment with a radiator that clanked all night and a kitchen so small I could touch both walls if I stretched my arms out. I was 20, broke, drowning in nursing school. Harold Pemberton lived next door at 16 Greendale Lane. 87 then, 89 when he died. The first time I knocked on his door, it was because I heard his TV on at 3 in the morning and I thought something was wrong. He opened the door in this old cardigan with a hole in the elbow and just looked at me, like he'd forgotten what it was like to have someone check on him. He said, "I'm fine, dear, just can't sleep." And then, after a pause, "Would you like some tea?" That was Harold, retired aerospace engineer, helped build things that went to space. Brilliant man. But he was alone. His family, his daughter, Regina, hadn't spoken to him in years. He didn't talk about why, not at first. He just played chess with me on Sunday afternoons and let me win sometimes. He was terrible at pretending he wasn't letting me win. He'd move his bishop into the most obvious spot and then look at the ceiling like he hadn't noticed. He liked his tea with 2 sugars and a little too much milk. He laughed with his whole chest even when it made him cough. He had this heavy wooden desk in his study that was always locked. I noticed it the first time I helped him carry books in from the porch. I asked about it once and he just smiled and said, "Old papers, nothing interesting." And I left it alone because that's what you do when you respect someone. You don't push. That Tuesday morning, day 1, I guess, of everything that came after, I walked over with a bag of groceries and his door was open. Not all the way, just ajar. A couple inches. And I knew. I don't know how, but my whole body knew before my brain caught up. He was in his reading chair, eyes closed, hands in his lap. The book he'd been reading was still open on the armrest. He looked peaceful, and I hated that, because peaceful meant gone. I put the groceries down on the floor and I just stood in his doorway with my hand on the frame because I couldn't walk forward, and I couldn't walk away. I don't remember calling anyone. I must have. But I remember the quiet. That was the worst part. 3 days later, day 4, I was sitting in a law office I had no business being in, Whitfield and Associates on Piedmont Road. A man in a gray suit read Harold's will out loud, and I stopped breathing. Harold left me everything. The house at 16 Greendale Lane, his investments, all of it. $4.7 million. I didn't understand. I kept saying, "There's a mistake." There wasn't. Then the door opened, and a woman walked in like she owned the room. Regina Hale, 58 years old, Harold's daughter. Behind her was her son, Dominic Hale, 31, tall, jaw tight. They'd been contacted about the will too. When the attorney told them what Harold had decided, Regina's face changed into something I'll never forget. She pointed at me across that polished table and said I had manipulated a vulnerable old man. She said she would destroy me. Her voice was shaking, but not from grief, from rage. I sat there clutching that document to my chest with both hands and I couldn't say a word. I just kept thinking, where were you? Where were you for the last 15 years while I was bringing him soup and playing chess and making sure he wasn't alone on Christmas? But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. I just cried. Within a week, my name was everywhere. Regina hired an attorney named Victor Staines. Aggressive, expensive, the kind of lawyer who probably bills you for the time it takes him to say hello. By day 11, he'd filed a lawsuit contesting Harold's will. The grounds were undue influence and elder exploitation. Those words, about me, in a legal document, on the news. I saw my own face on a local news segment while I was eating cereal at my kitchen table at 14B Greendale Lane. They used my student ID photo. The headline called Harold, a vulnerable elderly man, and me, the young neighbor who inherited millions. They didn't say I brought him groceries. They didn't say I held his hand during thunderstorms because the noise reminded him of the launch failures he'd worked through in the 60s. They just made it sound like I'd done something wrong by caring about someone. My neighbors on Greendale Lane, people who used to wave at me when I took out the trash, started pulling their curtains shut when I walked by. My classmates at nursing school got quiet around me. One of them showed me a screenshot on her phone. A social media post from Dominic Hale calling me a gold digger who preyed on a senile old man. Regina had shared it. Hundreds of strangers I'd never met were commenting, agreeing with people who hadn't once visited Harold in the 2 years I knew him. I couldn't afford a lawyer, I could barely make rent. I actually thought about just giving it all up, signing whatever they wanted me to sign, walking away, not because they were right, but because I was so tired and it had only been a week. On day 14, I found Marcus Chen. He was 29, running a small legal practice on Birchwood Avenue, one of those offices above a dry cleaner, with a filing cabinet that didn't close all the way. He took my case pro bono. He sat across from me and said, "This is going to take months, and it's going to get ugly. Are you sure?" I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure about anything, but then he showed me something. Harold had left a handwritten letter with the will. The attorneys at Whitfield and Associates had it in the file, and Marcus had requested a copy. He slid it across the desk, and I picked it up, and I saw Harold's handwriting, that careful, slightly shaky cursive I recognized from the notes he'd leave on his kitchen counter. And I lost it. He wrote that I was the only person who treated him like a human being in his final years. He said I never asked him for anything. He said I talked to him like he mattered, and that most days I was the only reason he got out of bed. He said he wanted me to have a real chance at life because I'd given him a reason to keep living his. I sat in Marcus's tiny office on Birchwood Avenue and I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe. I held that letter against my chest and I rocked back and forth in my chair like a child, because Harold was still taking care of me, even after he was gone. I told Marcus I'd fight. Not for the money. I didn't care about the money. But Harold chose me. He wrote it down in his own hand, and I wasn't going to let the people who abandoned him take that away. The weeks turned into months and I started to disappear. Not all at once. It was slow. I stopped cooking. I stopped sleeping through the night. My scrubs hung looser on me because I was forgetting to eat, and when I did eat, I couldn't keep much down. Between nursing clinicals and court dates and depositions where Victor Staines asked me the same questions 15 different ways trying to catch me in something, I was running on nothing. My best friend, Naomi Park, she's 23, works at a cafe on Maple Street. She basically kept me alive during those months. She'd show up at 14B Greendale Lane with a bag of food and just sit with me. She didn't always say the right thing. Sometimes she said nothing, but she showed up. Every time. She'd say, "Ilara, you have to eat." And I'd say, "I know." And then I wouldn't, and she'd come back the next day with something else. Marcus Chen was working around the clock. He pulled Harold's medical records. He got testimony lined up from Harold's longtime doctor, Dr. Fiona Albright, who confirmed there were never any signs of dementia. Harold was sharp. He read 3 newspapers a day. He could still do mental math faster than I could use a calculator. Dr. Albright was ready to say all of that under oath, but Regina's legal team, they weren't done. They dug into my finances. They pulled my student loan records. They tried to make my debt look like a motive, like I'd befriended Harold because I was desperate, like every meal I cooked for him, every game of chess, every quiet evening sitting on his porch watching the street, all of it was just a long con. The lowest point came outside the courthouse on Piedmont Road. I was walking to my car after a hearing, and Dominic Hale was there. He stepped right in front of me. He was bigger than me, taller, and he got close, too close, and he said, "You're a thief. You know that, right? You stole from my family." I didn't say anything. My hands started shaking and there was this ringing in my ears, and I just stood there on the sidewalk while people walked past and nobody stopped. Dominic finally stepped back and walked away, and I got in my car and drove home, and I don't remember the drive. I just remember being on my bathroom floor afterward, sitting against the tub, staring at the wall tile. I almost quit. All of it. The case, nursing school, everything. But the next afternoon I did something I hadn't done since Harold died. I walked over to 16 Greendale Lane. His house, still untouched. I used the spare key he'd given me 2 years ago, and I let myself in. Everything smelled like him, old books and wood polish and that peppermint soap he liked. His reading chair was right where it always was, by the window with the lace curtains. I sat down in it and pulled my knees up and closed my eyes. And I could hear him. Not really. Not like a ghost or anything. But I could hear the way he used to talk about building satellites, like he was telling me a bedtime story. I could hear him laughing when I'd take his rook and he'd pretend to be offended. I could hear him saying, "Your move, Alara." I opened my eyes and looked at the locked desk across the room. Harold's desk that I never asked about again after that first time. Whatever was in there, he'd kept it to himself. I respected that then, and I respected it now. So I stayed in his chair until the light through the curtains turned gold. And I kept going. 5 months in, Marcus called me and said, "I need you to come to Harold's house." He'd been going through Harold's personal documents as part of the estate inventory, including the contents of that locked desk in the study at 16 Greendale Lane. The heavy wooden one Harold never opened in front of me. The one I'd noticed 2 years ago and never pushed him about. Marcus had gotten it opened, and what he found inside changed everything. There was a folder. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all written by Harold over the past 15 years, all addressed to Regina Hale. None of them had ever been sent. The envelopes were sealed, stamped, addressed, but never mailed. Every single one. I sat at that desk and Marcus handed them to me one at a time and I read them. Harold begged her to visit. He asked about Dominic, what he was doing, if he was happy, if he'd grown tall. He apologized for things I didn't fully understand. He told her he loved her in almost every letter. Some of them were short, just a few lines. Some of them were pages long, written in that careful handwriting that got shakier as the years went on. He never sent them. I don't know if he was afraid she wouldn't answer or afraid she would. Next to the folder was a journal. Harold had kept a record, dates, times, every single attempt he made to reach out to his daughter. Phone calls she didn't pick up. A birthday card returned unopened, an email address that bounced back. He wrote it all down like he was documenting a project. That was Harold, engineer to the end. And then Marcus showed me the last thing, bank records, from 2012. A power of attorney that Regina had pressured Harold into signing, and withdrawal records showing she'd taken over $300,000 from his accounts before he caught on, revoked the power of attorney and changed his locks. Harold had documented every transaction, every date, every amount, every account number. He had printouts from the bank. He had notes in his own handwriting. He had everything he needed to report her. He never did, because she was his daughter, and he still loved her. I put the journal down and I put my hands over my face and I just sat there. Marcus didn't say anything for a long time. I thought I knew Harold. I thought I understood what his loneliness looked like. But I didn't. Not really. The man I brought soup to on rainy days. The man who laughed at my bad jokes and taught me how to play the Sicilian defense. He was holding all of this inside him. 15 years of reaching out to someone who wouldn't reach back. His own daughter stealing from him. And he just sat in that chair by the window and kept going day after day, alone, until I knocked on his door at 3 in the morning and he offered me tea. He never told me any of it. Not once. I think that's the part that broke me the most. Not what they did to him, but that he carried it so quietly I never even knew. 7 months after Harold died, we stood in the county courthouse on Piedmont Road for the final hearing. I wore the only nice clothes I owned. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them flat against my legs under the table. Marcus sat next to me, calm in a way I've never been able to manage, with Harold's journal and the unsent letters and the bank records organized in neat folders in front of him. Regina sat across the room with Victor Staines. She was wearing expensive clothes, same as the first day I saw her at Whitfield & Associates. Dominic sat behind her. He looked tired. Marcus presented everything. He went through it piece by piece. The letters Harold wrote and never sent. He read passages out loud, and the courtroom got so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. Then the journal documenting years of unanswered calls and returned cards. And then the financial records, the 2012 power of attorney, the $300,000 in withdrawals, Harold's own handwritten notes tracking every dollar Regina took before he revoked her access and changed his locks. Dr. Fiona Albright testified. She looked right at the judge and said Harold Pemberton was one of the sharpest patients she'd ever had. Cogent, articulate, deliberate. She said he knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote that will. Then a former colleague of Harold's took the stand, an older man I didn't know, and he said Harold used to talk about the girl next door who reminded him that people could still be kind. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Victor Staines tried to discredit the journal. He said anyone could write dates in a notebook. But the bank records matched. The dates matched. Everything Harold wrote down lined up with paper trails and third-party records. There was nowhere to go with it. Then the judge asked Regina directly about the $300,000 withdrawal. She hesitated. She started one sentence, stopped, started another. She contradicted something she'd said in an earlier deposition. Victor Staines tried to redirect, but it was too late. She'd been caught, and everyone in that room knew it. I looked at Dominic. He was staring at his mother like he was seeing her for the first time. His face just fell. Whatever story he'd been told his whole life, whatever version of events Regina had given him about why they didn't talk to his grandfather, it was coming apart right there on that bench. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like someone who'd just realized the ground he'd been standing on wasn't solid. The judge ruled in my favor. He said Harold's will was valid. He said Harold's wishes were clear and well documented, and that there was no evidence of undue influence. He said it plainly, like it was obvious, and maybe it had been obvious all along to everyone except the people in that room who were too deep inside it to see straight. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt like I won. I didn't. I just felt sad. This huge, aching sadness that filled up my whole chest and wouldn't move. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the October wind was blowing leaves around, and I was just standing there trying to figure out how to walk to my car when Dominic came up to me. Quietly, hands in his pockets. He said, "I'm sorry. I was told a different story, my whole life." I was trembling. I couldn't get words together. I just nodded. He stood there for another second, then he walked away. Not back toward his mother, just away. Regina was already gone. She left without saying a word to anyone. I sat down on those stone steps, and I thought about Harold in his reading chair, writing letters to a daughter who would never read them, and I thought about all that love he had that just went nowhere. And I cried. Not the angry, desperate kind of crying from the last 7 months. A different kind. The kind that comes when the fight is over and you finally have room to feel how much everything cost. Winning didn't feel like winning. It just felt like the fighting was finally done. 3 months later, I graduated from nursing school. Naomi was in the front row, yelling louder than anyone. I could hear her over everything. I almost laughed on stage, which would have been embarrassing, but honestly I didn't care. It was the first time in almost a year that something good happened, and I was actually present for it. Not in my head replaying a courtroom or a social media comment, or the look on Dominic's face when his world rearranged itself. I used part of Harold's estate to pay off my student loans. The rest, I thought about it for a long time. What he would have wanted, what would make it mean something real. I set up the Harold Pemberton Kindness Scholarship at my university. It's for students who show up for people, not the ones with the highest grades or the most impressive resumes, the ones who check on their neighbors, the ones who sit with someone in a hospital waiting room, even when they have somewhere else to be. Harold would have liked that. He would have probably said it was too much, and then gotten quiet and looked out the window the way he did when he was trying not to get emotional. I kept the house at 16 Greendale Lane. I couldn't let it go. I spent weeks fixing it up. Not changing it, just taking care of it the way he would have wanted. Painting the trim. Fixing the porch step that always creaked. I turned his reading room into a small community library open to the neighborhood. I put his books on the shelves along with donated ones, and I kept his chair right where it was, by the window with the lace curtains. Nobody sits in it. I don't think anyone needs to be told not to. It just feels like his. Naomi helped me organize the first open house. She made signs. She brought pastries from the cafe on Maple Street. People came. Neighbors on Greendale Lane who hadn't spoken to me in months, some of them looking a little sheepish when they walked through the door. I didn't hold it against them. I was too tired for grudges, and Harold wouldn't have wanted that anyway. Marcus Chen came too. He stood in the doorway of the reading room with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the shelves, and when he looked at me there was something warm in his expression that I didn't have a name for yet. We didn't talk about the case. We talked about books, about what I was planting in the backyard, about nothing important. It was nice. It was the first thing that had felt easy in a long time. I planted a garden in Harold's backyard, tomatoes mostly. He loved tomatoes. He used to tell me about growing them when he was a kid, before the engineering degrees and the rockets and the money and the daughter who stopped calling. He said the best thing about tomatoes was that they didn't need much, just sun and water and someone who paid attention. The evening of the open house, after everyone had left, I went out to the garden by myself. The sun was going down and the sky was that soft gold that makes everything look gentler than it is. I had one more thing to do. Marcus had found it in the locked desk with all the others, one last letter Harold never sent, addressed to Regina like the rest. But this one was different. It was only one line. "I forgive you." That was it. No explanation, no anger, just that. I knelt down in the dirt beside a new tomato plant and I held the letter for a minute. The paper was soft from being handled, the edges worn thin. He must have taken it out and read it to himself more than once, trying to decide whether to send it. He never did, but he meant it. I know he did. I whispered, "I hope you found your peace, Harold." Then I tucked the letter into the soil, right next to the roots, and I pressed the dirt down over it with both hands. And I smiled. For real. For the first time in months. Harold taught me something I don't think I could have learned any other way. That kindness is not wasted, even when nobody sees it, even when people try to punish you for it, even when the person you're kind to can never pay you back and the world tells you there must have been an angle. There was no angle. I just showed up. He showed up too, for a daughter who never came back. And somehow, in the middle of all that unanswered love, something good still grew. It's growing right now, actually. In his garden, in the last of the sun.